Hi, I'm Tracy Thomas. I've worked for St. Louis ARC for 28 and a half years. I am the Community Residential Assistant Director for our residential program in the community. And I started this assessment when I started having trouble figuring out how we could know if somebody was ready to stay home alone. So this is kind of where I have kind of come with this project. So let me tell you how this is set up. This is set up as an assessment. So we have 3 different papers that you'll be sent, and it is basically the assessment, and then it's called probes. Like how would you test this? How would we see if it's actually going to work? And this is hopefully what this is going to do is really help you think about where your individual is and what things you need to work on and what things maybe you can adapt the environment to make it a better situation at home for them to be able to stay home alone. I think most people think that it is scary to have someone that they love stay home alone if they're not sure how things will go, what things will happen. So we're going to take it a little bit at a time. So the first thing that we look at is before someone stays home alone, you need to make sure that they have home safety, that they can do some emergency drills, and they have stranger awareness. So we're going to hit each of those 3 sections individually. The first one is, does the person want to stay home alone? A lot of times this is something that somebody else wants, maybe not them. And every time you walk out the door, maybe they'll call you, something's gone on. Is this something that they really want to do? Now, this was geared towards a residential setting. So we have to follow certain rules that we have to through DMH, Department of Mental Health. We have to have working smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, and weather radios. And we use the weather radios because it will alert to tornadoes and stuff within an area. I will tell you, we've had some difficulty with those with people that sometimes if you put the settings on too wide, you'll get them from like all over the state or all over the area. Sometimes you have to narrow them down. So one of the first things we look at are the windows locked when you leave, or can the person get out without assistance? One of the first things we have to look at are people can get out. We have to have one window that is available to get in and out without something being blocked. And we kind of look at that to make sure somebody cannot get in. Are there first aid supplies available? Does the person know how to use them? If they get hurt, can they know where a Band-Aid is? And do you trust them to put a Band-Aid on, or do you want them to call you? You also want to look at if there's activities that need to be limited to when they are at home. So do you want them to cook? Do you want them to shower? Do you want them to go outside? Answer the door, use appliances. So kind of looking at those kind of items that you feel like the individual would be safe or unsafe to do. And then that way you can set up your parameters with them. So one of the probes can be, does the individual know how to use a microwave? Can they use the stove? Maybe you put something in the microwave, they're going to be gone 2 hours. Maybe you put the snacks on the counter, or you set up the microwave for a certain time that is only up to that time. We have actually went back and found some of those old microwaves that has the turn dials that we can go to a minute or 2 minutes, and we put a little sticker or a line there that tells them where to go. Or we write 100 and hit the instant button, and we put like a little star or something on there so they know exactly what to hit. And answering the door, I think a lot of things have changed with technology. Now a lot of people have the Ring doorbells, so it's really easy to be able to check and see who's answering, who's coming to the door, if it's somebody that somebody should answer for or not answer for. So I think technology has made it a lot easier and safer for a lot of parents to feel like that they can leave somebody home alone. So if you haven't practiced safety drills, you might want to, and that's for anyone. That's one of those things they teach when you're in school, and just kind of know where to go. We have worked with different people we support on exactly where to go. If you go out the front door, you go to this tree. If you go out the back door, you go here. And just set those up and practice those, because you don't know when an emergency is going to happen. So this is stranger awareness. Determine if the person can answer the phone or the door. One of the things that I really suggest is contacting your police department, your local police department. You do not need to call the emergency number. All you need to do is call the regular number and ask them to flag your home address and let them know that a person with disabilities lives there. They will do that. We have done that to each of our supported living sites out in the community. And I'll tell you, we had an emergency at a 6-person group home, and they had us flagged, and they were able to bring extra people to kind of, and hats and different things like that to really engage the other individuals that we had there, so they could take more time with the one guy that really needed help. And that was really helpful. It's a really easy phone call. And I will tell you, I haven't had to update it very often. When I've called back 2 or 3 years later to update it, most of them were still flagged. And that's also one of the first things, if I move, that I would definitely do. This leads up to the assessment. The assessment is 20 questions, and each question has a probe, and then and then how to practice it. So you can be able to look at where the individual you support is on the spectrum. So the probe will help you decide yes or no, they are ready to start this, we're ready to be alone, or absolutely no, or this is the areas I need to work on to get them to that area, to be able to be alone. Number 1 is, does the person recognize the signals for a fire? So the probe is going to be, ask them, what are some things of a fire? And you're looking for flames, fire alarms going off, different things that would show you there was a fire, smoke. And then you're going to talk about that and look, and then the practice would be to show them pictures of a flame. And it also may be really kind of going into the kitchen and looking at the different, if you have a gas stove, and what to use and what not to use. So again, this assessment is assessed to somebody in a residential setting, not in home. And so what we do is we do have to run evacuation drills, and those evacuation drills are fire, earthquake, and tornado. Some people have asked about knowing how to use a fire extinguisher. I don't think it's absolutely required that somebody needs to know how to use a fire extinguisher. Most people that I know have not used one themselves. The one thing that I think that a person would need to know is make sure that everything is safe in the kitchen, so you don't have any of those kind of issues. So the next question for number 3 is, does the person indicate signs of a tornado? And the probe would be asking them what the tornado sirens look like, looking for alerts and alarms, all of those kind of things. It really does help with technology. The warnings are usually on the television. You get alerts on your devices. So an example that I have with this is I supported a lady that was home alone, and the tornado siren went off, and she went to the basement by herself, and she took the phone and she called me. And one of the things that we did that does help is that we actually made a box, and we took the box to the basement, and the box included some games, some snacks, some drinks, some puzzle books and things that were not usually what she would have, a battery operated radio that we kept the batteries out of so they would not oxidize. And that way she had a box down there of things to do when those tornado sirens and stuff goes off, and she didn't feel quite alone. And at that time we were in the city and the power was going off quite a bit. That was the year that we had a ton of tornadoes, I felt like. So that was one of the things that really helped us. So again, the next one is the evacuating for a tornado drill within 2 minutes. Number 5 on the assessment is, does a person recognize what an earthquake is? I feel like this is the hardest one to teach, because things shake and then they're done. And a lot of people don't even know if it actually happened. Was that an earthquake? Was it not? And it's really hard to even know what to teach. So number 7 is, can the individual dial phone numbers independently? I think this one has really been changed with technology. You can even put phone numbers into a phone and just hit one number and be able to call anyone that they want. You can put pictures on cell phones now, which is really nice. So you can just see the picture people when you look at that. They also still make the phones that have pictures that you can have in your home. So you would have the picture next to a face, so it'd be a little bit easier to do that. Those are still made. The speed dialing really helps. Some people put 911 as a programmed number, and some people don't. One of the biggest things that I think you need to look at is when to call 911. These are most of my examples are residential because that's where I've been for about 28 years. So with this, we had a person that called 911 because her mom didn't answer the phone. We had somebody else who called 911 because their roommate got mad at them. So one of the things we work on is when to call 911 and when not to call 911. So some families have actually changed the calling 911 to calling one other person, teaching when to call that person. I have spoke with somebody at 911, and this is actually a pretty common thing. So one of the things to kind of teach and work on is number 9 in the assessment is does the person know when to call someone for assistance when it's not an emergency? What is an emergency to one person is not an emergency to another person. An emergency to one person is that the cable went out. They can't find their favorite snack. So the probe would be the practice. Ask the person, what are some reasons that you would call for help? You maybe have somebody practice and come and knock on the door, walk by the window that they don't know. What would they do? So basically what this whole assessment is to figure out as a caregiver, your comfort zone with the individual staying home alone. And if you feel like they would be safe. An example is I supported somebody that lived in an apartment. I had to run down to the basement and change the laundry over. And I walk back upstairs and the individual is talking to someone at the front door. And I go to see who it is, and it's some stranger at the door. Well, he knocked on the door, so I let him in. So that let me know that he was nowhere near ready to want to stay home alone. Or he wanted to stay home alone. I was not ready for him to stay home alone. So the assessment question number 10 is, does a person know not to give out personal information over the telephone? I think this has changed a little bit more with cell phones, but I don't know about anybody else. I have gotten 5 spam calls today. And I think sometimes with technology also comes more chances for somebody to get scammed with text messages. I've gotten the scams recently from Amazon saying my account's locked. I'll get a phone call from a different number, and then you hear that click, click, where they're switching over to something else. So there's positives and negatives in technology and being able to have that ability. And do you want them to have a cell phone? And if they don't have a cell phone, if a person does not have access to a cell phone, is there a home line that they can use to have? I would be uncomfortable leaving someone home alone if you did not have a way for them to contact them, or them to contact you if there was an emergency. So number 11 is, does the person know not to open the door to strangers? That's the example I gave earlier. One of the things that the probe would be is to ask them who you'd answer the door to, policemen, firemen. Maybe you have Uncle George that can come over. Definitely set those boundaries and work on those kind of items. Number 12, can the person use the stove independently? If the answer is no, it doesn't mean that they can't stay home alone. You may need to put in some safety measures. Some examples I've heard is taking off the knobs. If somebody, they just didn't feel comfortable, they would take off the knobs on the front of the stove so they could not use it. Somebody had actually told me about where their loved one tried to continually cook even when they weren't home, and they were the ones that put the pan in the microwave with the fork and caught a microwave on fire. And they also burnt a couple things in the oven. So they were working on, they did not want to take the ability away for the person to stay home alone, but they had to find different ways to make it safe. So some of the things they did is they actually had something installed on their stove so they could just turn it off and on, sort of like a breaker system, and be able to not have that on when that person was home alone. They went through 2 microwaves before they decided to actually unplug it, and they put a safety thing over the plugs so the person could not plug it back in. So there's definitely things you can do. Just because someone cannot do everything on this list doesn't mean that they can't stay home alone at all, but you definitely need to look at what's the safety tips that would work for you. Assessment question number 13 is, can they use the oven? Again, it kind of goes back to the last one. You may not want them to use the oven when they're home alone. I know there are some stoves that have oven locks, so you cannot use the oven. This goes to number 14, the individual using the microwave. This goes to the one I explained with the family, that it was actually in this training that they told me that their child had burned up 2 microwaves. They learned very quickly that aluminum foil does not go in the microwave, and neither do forks. So they put on this safety thing that their loved one could not remove when they were home, and they unplugged the microwave. So number 15 and the assessment question is the individual safe to use the shower if left home alone? Is there certain places in the house that you don't want them to go? Is it okay to shower? Are you afraid that they're going to fall? Are they a fall risk? Is the shower in a basement? Those kind of things. Earlier, I was talking about places to go. Is it okay for them to go to the basement? Is that the attic? Places that you wouldn't think that someone may go. Think about that. Maybe you look at, can they go up to their bedroom, or can they go outside? Think about what limit you want to put on them. When you look at the mobilizing, it may be things such as going in the backyard, going in the front yard, kind of being able to put those limits on and see if they feel safe. So you want to look at that. So the questions and probes is going to be checking to see if the mobility is pretty good. A lot of the people we support are young, and they can go up and down stairs and stuff quickly. I tend to support people that the average age is in the 60s. So for us, mobility is very important, but it may be something at where it's not the mobility that's a problem. It may be something as they get into brothers and sisters rooms, they get into some other things that they should not be. So then what do you need to do? I know some families have put in locks and lock certain rooms when the person is left alone. Number 17 is, if they are left alone, would they agree not to use the appliances? Would they agree to follow the expectations that you set up? If they continue to not follow the expectations you set up, and you continue to have to put more and more barriers in there, then maybe them staying home alone is not safe. If the barriers that you have to put up to ensure that they're safe are a lot more than the joy and the ability to stay home alone, then staying home alone probably isn't for them at this time. Assessment question number 18 is, does the individual know chemicals to use and not to use? You would think typically that nobody would mix chemicals. Again, somebody stayed home alone and decided they had spilt something on the floor and on the carpet, and they decided that they needed to clean it up while they were home alone, and they happened to use Clorox. And when the next staff came in, there was a nice little white mark on the floor. So we started putting them in different bottles and kind of explaining to them, these are the ones that are safe to use, these are the ones not safe to use, because they ended up with some carpet that didn't start out as white. Question number 19 is, would the individual actually remain at home? That was a concern that another family had. Would their person leave? And if their person would leave and not tell somebody, again, you need to ask those probing questions, like, why would they leave? Where would they go? When's it safe to leave? What, maybe having one of those strategies, if something happens, you can go here. Who would you tell? And if you practice, and my suggestion is when you practice is typically I would start practicing by going in the backyard for 5 minutes and then 10 minutes. So you can be close, but then you can still go back in and check. That's a way that somebody can be home alone and that you may feel comfortable and they can feel comfortable. Another thing that a lot of people have done is put cameras in the house, in their houses now. And that way they can check on their loved one and see if where they are and what they're doing.
This kind of goes into number 20, but any experience with individuals messing with their parents' medications at home, wondering if we should lock them up.
Obviously, in the residential setting that we have locked medicine cabinets, but I also do respite in people's homes. And I would say definitely, many of the families that I know have to lock up their medications. I actually supported a person that had kind of an obsession with needles, and they would actually take the parents' needles and stick them in their skin and end up with bruises and things like that. So definitely lock boxes for medications if you are afraid that somebody is getting into meds. That's not something you can mess with, especially in today's society where I think a lot of teenagers and stuff can cave to peer pressure. A lot of parents and older adults, grandparents are on medications that definitely have a resale value. And I think a lot of times the people that the individuals we support tend to be those ones that can be that person that not know that it's wrong. I actually did have this at one of my respite homes where a sibling in the house took an individual's that I support's medications and sold them at her school. So they had to actually start locking up all of the medications in the house. So regular medication, I think there's a lot of things if somebody's going to be home alone. You could put them in those little pouches, those little med things. I work with a couple of young guys that he knows that his medicine is mom's got one for morning, one for night. And when I would come and stay with him, I would just double check that his medicines and those things were done. There's also some medicine timers that those are a little bit more expensive, but they can actually keep the medicine and it'll dole it out at a certain time. You also have the medicine boxes that maybe you just put them in for that one time while you're out. So there's definitely options for things like that. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good evening.